Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of ArtByRow.com, where I help hobby artists grow by teaching them how to focus on the process rather than the outcome. I specialize in developing creativity, creating more art in less time, and using graffiti art to generate ideas instead of always wondering what you should be working on. If this sounds like something you'd be interested in, subscribe so you get notified whenever new videos get uploaded. Now let's head on over to the art studio and do some drawings. We're going to work on today's tutorial together. Let's head on over. Alright, so today we're going to learn how to draw a dragon eye. And I really love doing these. There's so many different ways you can change them up. Different colors, different textures, different designs all together. It's just, you can do so many different things with these. They're really easy and they're a lot of fun. And I've always just loved drawing eyes, whether it's a human eye or an animal eye or a reptile, owls, it doesn't matter. Eyes are just so much fun to draw. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm working on an artist trading card, which is cut out of cardstock. And I usually do my work on artist trading cards because it saves me a lot of time. I can put them in a little portfolio and I can trade them if I want to. So check out artist trading cards if you're not familiar with them. I will put a link in the description so you can check out. We have some videos and some articles on the Art by Row blog if you want to check that out. So how I start mine is I draw a circle for the eyeball, and then I'm going to go ahead and draw the eye shape. And it's easier to just draw that circle, even though part of it's going to get covered up. It gives you a nice little guide to follow so you can get that shape down. And you can change up the shape of your eye for your dragon as well. You don't have to stick with, you know, kind of your typical eyeball shape. You know, the shape of the eye itself. You could use, instead of using rounded off lines, you could use more straight and more sharp edges. So if you draw curved lines, you get a softer look, but if you draw sharper edges with corners, then you're going to get something that feels a little more maybe like fierce looking. If you're doing a dragon, maybe you want a dragon to look kind of fierce. On the opposite side of that, if you want it to look more feminine or like, you know, kind of cutesy, then what you could do is you could draw it bigger and more rounded and fuller looking, and that'll give it a softer look. So these are things you need to keep in mind when you're deciding how you want to go about doing your drawings, is what do you want it to look like. And you could try doing a bunch of different styles, which is what I typically will do. So as I'm going through here and I'm thinking about these decisions, well, then I might want to go back and try one and see how fierce can I make it look, or how cute can I make it look. So right now we're just drawing out the actual shape of the eye. Nothing complicated. You can go in and erase if you need to get rid of some of these pencil lines and clean it up a little bit. I usually just leave them. You do need to remove some of the lines if it's getting like too kind of cluttered up feeling, or if you're losing track of where you're at. So there's our eye shape. And the next thing we need to do is start drawing in the scales. And again, so many different ways you can draw the scales. Also, the size that you draw the eye. So if I drew this eye shape here, if that was smaller, I would have more area for scales, and that would make my overall drawing look a little bit different. So all these things that you do, and this is why I like doing artist trading cards, because it saves me a lot of time. They're fairly quick to draw, especially compared to, like, if I was trying to do this in a sketchbook, I'd be drawing it much bigger. and it would take me a lot longer to do. And chances are, if I'm spending an hour or two on a drawing, I'm not going to try doing multiple variations of it. So what I like to do is just put in some smaller scales along the edge of the eye. And you can do these any shape you want. You can make them very uniform. You can change it up, make them variable, different sizes, different shapes. It's completely up to you. And again, if you're doing multiple drawings, you can try different things. You can try making your scales more uniform, more of like a pattern, a very distinct pattern, or you can do them very random. You could do rectangles, you could do circles. So now that I have my outside edges for the eye, now I'm going to go ahead and do some bigger scales to kind of just quickly fill in this area. You could do small scales if you wanted. You could just continue to do these small scales all the way around. I think personally it looks better if you add in some larger scales for the rest of it. That is very much a personal preference. If you think it looks better with the smaller scales, then go ahead and do yours with smaller scales. If you think rounded scales would look better, then do them with rounded scales. Art should be whatever you think looks right. That's what helps create your artistic style, is all these different things that are your personal preference of what you think looks right or what looks wrong. We're not always going to have the same opinions about everything. Just because I like the way it looks having these scales bigger, you may not feel that way. You might feel like doing them smaller. Maybe you want to go even smaller than what I have here. And if that's what looks and feels right to you, then that's how you need to create your artwork. And that's what's going to help develop your style, is by following the things that you think that look right, that feel right. If something that you're doing just doesn't feel quite right to you, then I don't think you should do it that way. Unless you are specifically trying to do something different, do something new, expand a little bit. You know, there's nothing wrong with giving something a try, even if it doesn't seem quite right to you. But if you want to explore some different techniques or some different styles, but if you're just creating your artwork, then you should always follow whatever feels right to you, and that will help you develop your style. So I'm just working on filling this in. Now, sometimes what I'll do is when I get down into this area here, maybe I might do another row of some smaller ones, or sometimes I'll change it up and do some circle patterns for my scales. And again, there's really no right or wrong way to do this. It's all just what you're in the mood for. Maybe if you're doing it and the smaller scales just feel just super tedious to you that day, then you might want to skip the smaller ones and just do some bigger ones. You know, and that's often how things are, new ideas and some unique artworks are designed that way, is when you try something new, maybe just because of whatever type of a mood you're in that day. You switch it up and you kind of accidentally stumble across maybe something a little bit different for yourself. And that's the great thing about art, right? There's really no right or wrong way to do things. We have our rules that we're told to follow, but guess what? Doesn't mean you have to follow them. Experiment, explore, try something new, try something fun. All right, so there is the drawing. And that's all the detail you really need to put in. And then the next thing we need to do is we will go in and do our outline with some black. All right, so the next thing is to outline our dragon eye drawing. And I like using black. That's a personal preference. It's what I like doing. You could use a different color. And I also like using these Sharpie pens. They make really nice outlines. And they don't bleed very much on the paper. And again, I'm using cardstock. You could also use a marker if you want to use a marker. The reason I don't use markers for this is because the markers tend to bleed a little bit into the paper and it'll give you kind of a fuzzy edge. And I don't like the way it looks. So I'll typically use these black Sharpie pens for my outlines. And this is different than the other Sharpie markers, the ultra fine. I don't know. See if I can find one real quick here. Nope, I don't see one in my drawer, but you know, they're white with the black caps. I think they're called like ultra fine. These are different than those. I like these a lot better. But like I said, it's all very much personal preference of just what you like or what you don't like. And it's totally up to you on what you want to use, how you want to do your drawings and your outlines. So all you want to do is just go right over top of your pencil lines. And like I said, you can do this with a marker if you want to use a marker. You could do it with a different color if you don't like black. That's all, again, part of your personal style, your own artistic style. If you don't like the way black looks, then try using a different color, or maybe you want to do something that doesn't stand out as much. And there's really no right or wrong way to do it. You just try it and see what looks right and what doesn't look right. And if you want to experiment and try different things, then that's what you should do. And that's why I really love doing the artist trading cards, because they typically take, I don't know, roughly about a half hour, I guess, to do one card. And of course, they could take much longer if you wanted to add in a lot of really fine details and do, you know, like some little bit more advanced techniques. I don't put a ton of time into these. I mean, not as much as you could if you really, some of them are just super, super detailed. A lot of why I don't is because if I tried to make it super, super detailed, I know how I am with things and I just don't have the attention span to do it. And I've spent most of my life struggling with not finishing things and how bad that makes me feel. If you're somebody who doesn't finish things and starts a lot of drawings or projects and nothing ever gets finished, then you understand how bad of a feeling that is sometimes, and how much of a struggle it can be with your mind and your own feelings for the guilt or shame or whatever you want to call it for not finishing things. So that's a lot of why I don't do super detailed drawings, because I know I'm not going to finish it. And to me, that would be just setting myself up for failure. So when I started doing these artist trading cards, one thing I noticed is I felt a lot better about myself where my artwork's concerned because I actually finish stuff now. Where before I would try to do these big, huge pieces and they would never get done. I'd have all these half-started projects and then I would think, oh, well, I guess I'm just not inspired by it anymore. I'm just bored with it or whatever. So then I would start something different. I'm excited about this other thing now. Let me do that because I feel inspired and excited, so I'll finish this one. Nope. Start that, get bored with it. It just sits. Then after a while, I get myself all motivated and inspired to do something yet again, something different. And of course, that wouldn't get finished. So what I found by doing the artist trading cards is not only do I finish the one that I'm working on, but I also feel motivated to do more and to start on another one. So if you can spend 15, 20 minutes or a half hour every day, you could easily do a drawing a day and finish it, instead of trying to spend 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever it would take to do a bigger piece. And you can do it much quicker on the artist trading cards. So that's why I do them. And I think that's why I like the style of drawing that I've been doing, with doing the same process of sketching it out and then outlining it with black, and then I'll go in and fill in the color with marker. And I found that this has been working really well for me, at least at this stage of my life right now. And probably someday I'll get bored with it and I'll start experimenting with something else, but you gotta find what works. And just because somebody else says to do something, it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work for you, but it's good to pay attention what other people are doing, and if it seems like something you might enjoy, then you try it and see how it works. And if it doesn't work for you, then that's okay. You just go ahead and move on to something else and get ideas from different people. Now, the other thing that I can do, one thing I want to mention real quick is how I filled in some of these gaps with black. But you can also go back over your lines and thicken them up a little bit and kind of make some areas a shadow. Or if nothing else, just to add a little variation in your lines. Will make them look a little bit more interesting. And I do want to, I'm going to erase this because I don't want that circle there. I decided to do the pupil, that diamond triangle shape. And you can always make the pupils different. You can make them look kind of more like a, I don't know, like a dagger type looking. I've done those before. Those look kind of cool. But I'm just going to go ahead and fill this in with the same black pen. And then you can darken up any areas you want to go back over and make these lines a little more bold. And just go right back over top of it with the pen. Now, if something like that feels really tedious to you and you don't want to have to do that, you could always use a bigger marker or pen. Or what works really well is brush markers, where you can vary your line weight with that one marker. But that's about it for this. The only thing left to do is to use a big eraser, go over top the pencil lines and clean it up. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm also going to grab some colors, some different markers. And you don't have to use markers, color pencils will work really well. But I think I'm going to make this guy green. So I'll grab a couple different green markers. I'll clean this up a little bit and we'll be back to do some color. Now I'm ready to do some color. And what I do is to pick out the color markers that I want is I try them out on a little scrap piece of paper. This is just a little scrap of cardstock. And I know I want to do a green color, and I'm going to do the eye first with yellow. So usually what I do with my markers is I will put the lightest color down first, and I'll typically use 2 or 3 colors on each section. So for example, for the eyeball itself, I'll use 2 colors, and then for the scales I'll use 2 different colors. But colors that go together, you want everything to go together and complement each other. So it's important, if you're using markers, it's important to know which colors go together and will blend if that's something you're trying to do. I like to blend my colors together. So I need to make sure the colors are similar enough that I can blend them, but different enough that you can see that there's 2 different colors. You don't want them to be so similar that they look the same. And you could always do a 3rd color if you wanted to do a 3rd color. That's up to you. Again, one of those things that are just a personal preference. So then what I want to do is start laying in the color for my scales. And if you are wanting to work in a way that you're blending your colors together, you want to work in small sections at a time. And typically what I'll do with the scales is, you can see I'm making kind of like a backward C shape on these. And I'm making them all that same shape, so that the light and the dark is in the same area. Now the other thing you could do is do your dark color first and then fill in what's left with the light color. Either way is fine. Again, it's up to you. It's personal preference of how you like to work. But you do want to make sure that you're doing all of this while the markers are still wet, so that they'll blend where the 2 colors come together. And you can mix and match colors. brands. You can mix and match brands of markers. So this marker that I have is a Sharpie. I have that yellow was a Bic marker. And then this yellow green is a touch marker. So it doesn't matter what brands you're using. You can use whatever you want. And as long as they're all alcohol-based markers, they will mix together. So as you can see, there's a little bit of a harsh line right here. And if you go back over it and saturate that paper a little bit, you'll get that to blend a little bit nicer. If your colors are too much different as far as the value of it, of the two different greens, if they're too different, then you won't have that smooth transition of color. But if you go over it a little bit more, right where those two colors come together, and that paper gets saturated with the alcohol, it will bleed them together and blend them. So another thing I should mention, I've gotten asked several times, is that won't it ruin your markers when you go over like the darker color with the lighter color? And it does not ruin the markers. The darker color is not going to transfer onto your other marker. There's also, they're called colorless blenders that you can use. I prefer just using the lighter marker. It's one less marker to have to switch back and forth with. Now the other thing is, if you want a harsher line, then that's fine. If that's the look you're going for, then it's okay to leave that harsher transition there instead of smoothing it out. Again, personal preference, whatever you like, whatever you want to do. If you want to leave these harder edges on your colors, that's fine. Now the other thing is, ideally, I would want another color between these two markers, these two greens that I'm using. I do not have a color that works well between the two, so I just kind of make do with what I have. And there's a little too much contrast between the two, and it leaves a little bit of a harder edge than what I would typically like. But in my mind, it's acceptable, especially for the type of drawings that I'll use these particular colors on. I find the difference to be acceptable, and the amount of the hard edge that's on there, I can deal with it. It doesn't bother me too much, so I go ahead and use those two colors. But like I said, if you could get a third color in there that is between the two, that would help blend them together a little bit more. For me, that would be ideal, but I don't have another color and I'm not going to stress out about it. So we just leave it with what it is and make do. Now, if that bothers you and you don't like that, then obviously you would want to do something different, or just not use those colors for your artwork. But again, that's personal preference. If it bothers you, then you would want to do it differently. If it doesn't bother you, or if that's more the look that you're going for, then obviously it's not an issue at all. But you do want to make sure you're working fairly quickly, or that you're working in small sections at a time, so that you can make sure that these colors can blend together as much as you want them to. So we're just going to keep working our way around here. See if there's anything else I forgot to mention. I have had quite a few people ask me about it ruining the markers, and I mean, honestly, you could take your yellow marker and go over top of a black marker and nothing's gonna happen. I've never had any type of color transfer onto another marker. Brands, that's what I want to talk about, brands. So a lot of different people have preferences for what brand of markers that they like using. Copic markers are very popular. They're also very expensive. For the type of work that I do and the purpose for my work, which is just my own joy and relaxation, I'm not commissioning any of my work. I'm not doing illustration work. So for me personally, I don't need Copic markers. It would be, I guess, kind of overkill. I don't know. It's not necessary for what I'm doing. If you're doing professional level work or illustration work or commission work, then that would probably be a little easier to justify the cost. And I'm sure they're worth the money. Just for me, it's not, financially, it's not worth it to spend the extra money for a higher quality marker when I don't need it. These work fine. My personal preference, I don't like Sharpies too much because they have a very strong odor, and I'm sensitive to that, and it gives me a headache and it'll bother me, so I don't really like using the Sharpies. That doesn't mean I won't use them, but I do prefer to stay away from them, and I haven't bought any new Sharpies in a while. I like the Bic markers, and for whatever reason, the Bic markers don't have the real strong odor like the Sharpies do. These touch markers I really like. And I also like the ends, the nibs that are on the touch markers. And another nice thing about these touch markers is that it's available, and I think they call it like open stock or something like that, where you can buy individual colors, where like the Sharpies and the Bic markers, the thing I don't like about the Bic markers is that you can't just buy like a specific shade of blue. You have to get them in packs, which means you have to buy like 24 or 48 markers to get one color if it runs out. So it's just not cost effective, because there's probably always going to be certain colors that you use more than others, kind of your go-to colors. And of course, those are going to run out much quicker than your other colors are going to. And then you're just going to be stuck with having to buy a whole pack of markers, or not being able to have what you really need. I'm going to try doing this in gray and see what it looks like. I typically like doing this part underneath the eye. A lot of times I'll just do it a completely different color. But I like to try new things, do something different from time to time. So we'll try doing gray and see what that looks like. It's not too bad. And then I think I'll also use this gray up here. And then what I do use the colorless blender for is something like this, where I'm doing a gray on white and I don't want to darken it up too much. You can use the colorless blender. And then I also want to darken this up a little bit. This marker's not quite as dark on the yellow as I would like it to be, but we'll just go back over top of it. And if you go over top of your markers with the same color, it will darken it up. They're semi-transparent, but there is some opaqueness to it. So if you keep going over top of them, you can layer them up and they'll get darker. So that's pretty much it. Let me get this all in the frame there so you can see it. And then the last thing I'll typically do is I like to use a jelly roll pen. This is just a white jelly roll pen. And then what you can do is add some highlights to your drawing. And depending on how dark your colors are, obviously if you're doing the white over top of a real light color, it's not going to show up. And if you do it over top of a darker color, it'll show up a little bit better. And I'm not going to do this on every single scale, but how I like to use white is I like to use it to break up the areas of color and just add a little bit of contrast in there. And again, you can You can use the white or don't use the white and play around with some different looks to it. How much white you want to add in here. Like I said, maybe you don't want to add any white at all. You could try adding the highlights on all the scales. You could try doing it just on part of the drawing. Just play around with it, see what it looks like. And the good thing with this white is if you get a little carried away with it, which is easy to do sometimes if you're not kind of taking a step back and looking at your drawing. If you overdo it with it, and what I mean by that is if you add too much white highlights and you don't like the way it looks, you can go right back over top of it and cover it up with the markers. It'll cover up pretty nicely. So I think that's it for this dragon eye. We're going to call this guy done. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon. Happy creating. So how did you do? Hopefully you followed along with the tutorial and worked on your own artwork. If you enjoyed this and you want to get notified of other lessons that are coming up in the future, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and you'll get notified whenever something new gets uploaded. Have a good day and happy creating!